So hello, everyone. Welcome to the September 2025 CLF Boston Northeast Reuse Group meeting. Thank you all for coming. Today, we have a presentation from two architects, Greg. I don't want to butcher the name, Greg and Wei from the New York City area. Well, they'll be talking about both movement in New York City as well as symposium they put on in May, similar to kind of what this group does, but kind of on a larger scale in person. And really kind of give some direction that a very close regional neighbor is doing. Before we get into that, Olivia, anything to add?
I am really excited to hear from Wei and Greg. One, because they're able to organize. They seem like they're doing a great job in New York City. As a sidebar, I've been getting FOMO of all the New York Climate Week events happening too. So I'm looking forward to learning about what they've gotten out of it, but also maybe seeing what kind of um, tips and tricks we can get for organizing in our New England area too.
Sure. No, perfect. So with that, Wei and Greg, we'll hand it over to you.
Hey everyone, so good to meet you. We heard a lot of great things CLF are doing and your Boston chapter too, so glad that we can connect here. Just a quick intro. I'm Wei. I actually just recently joined Gensler, design manager, and I co-chaired the AI Code New York subcommittee, circularity, healthy material and circularity with Greg.
And I'm Greg Bencivengo. I'm an architect with Slate Architecture here in New York City and associate principal. And in addition to working with Wei on our subcommittee, I've also was on the steering committee for the Grace Farms Design for Freedom Toolkit, which came out in 2022, if anyone's familiar with that.
So we're super excited to talk about this event. This is Greg and I joke this was our like professional wedding because the amount of planning that went into it. It took 6 months. A lot of coordination, a lot of help from different people from AIA and our network. And just some context, what kind of drove this event was back in 2023 when we just sort of took over the co-chair position for the subcommittee. We're really interested in understanding more and use the platform to figure out, what's happening in the world of circularity and how does that impact our industry, and then just kind of looking at the existing tools and resources that have. And so we actually created two virtual events. The first one was Arab Circular Building Toolkit, and just kind of as a high level seeing, what are some guiding principles and looking at project and design process through that lens. And then that event actually quickly, a lot of response from questions from the audience is kind of really honing on what does that mean in design and construction. So we follow up with part two, and we invite Felix Hansel, uh, folks from Arab, and Dan Stein from Lake Flato, and kind of talk more about, design for deconstruction and just again, like more high level. And then after these two events, there were a lot of momentum and attraction, and there were a lot of interest, and we realized circularity is so all-encompassing, as you all know, that involves policy, infrastructure, design, construction, engineers, consultants, and all stakeholders. And we felt that it's important to kind of organize an event that invite different stakeholders from, different parts of the industry, and to give a more holistic perspective on the subject, and then to better understand what the barriers and challenges and also opportunities ahead of us, across the board, but also more hone in on New York City, New York State. So with that, Greg, do you want to kind of oh, sorry, got the sequence. So yeah, so the event is 5 sessions. So Greg and we're gonna kind of give you a snapshot of each of the session, sort of the greatest hits. And then there's also, Greg, I can share screen.
Okay.
Let me, so ignore the graphics. We kind of pull that together. Can you all see the full screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there's Olivia, I shared the deck with you, so feel free to share with your group. And there is a YouTube video if you have an extra 5 hours laying around. The recording is completely online. So you're welcome to kind of, take a look. But so the 5 sessions are divided in the way that we invite folks from, the design world, construction, reuse, and architects, obviously policymakers, and all different aspects. So we're just going to give you a snapshot of each session. So I can go into the first session quickly, and Greg, you could
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit more. The first session, Olivia, I don't know you met her. So we met Lena Brex. She's an architect and CEO at a company called Matter and the co-founder of Circu, which Greg will dive in. We met her at the Copenhagen Circularity research trip that Greg and I went last year, and I know Olivia, you went earlier this year. This was one of the speakers from the Blocks Hub, and it's essentially a think tank for kind of R&D research and a lot of circularity discussion. So she was one of the presenter. We were really kind of blown away with her sort of overall thinking. And then we reach out to her and start the conversation. She actually offered to be a part of our symposium, the early stage of planning. So she ended up being our keynote speaker. So some of the things that really resonated with us is that she kind of offered a really powerful keynote, kind of examining how Denmark has approached circularity, not just as a design concept, but it's as an integrated systematic process. And then, they drawing from decades work across the EU and recent research in Denmark, she really emphasized the urgency of shifting our view of building from static objects to sort of a dynamic system. So this is sort of the shift from practice to strategy and seeing building not as an object, but really as a process was something that really stayed with me when she spoke about. And she
I
also,
think
yeah.
we're
I think
just
we have
seeing
that
your
slide,
cover
Wei.
slide still.
Oh,
Maybe we're not seeing the
let me
slides that you're
stop sharing.
panning through.
Oops. Sorry, 1 second. Computer froze. Okay, here we go. Maybe I'll just let me share my full screen. So, okay, 1 second. Okay, how about now?
Yeah.
Yay.
Okay, great. So this is sort of the slide, couple key components, like, how do we see building not as object, but as a process? And one of the things that we were all very curious is that, what is sort of Denmark doing right that we're not able to kind of follow as kind of rigorously is, it's not just cultural and the policy context, but it's really kind of through their legislation. It's really about circularity I feel like it's not viewed as a niche or experimental, but really kind of how do you have policy supported pathway that can integrate industry research and governance? So there's a very strong relationship between policy and private sector and the whole political landscape, and it's kind of more homogeneous, and then they also kind of build infrastructure along the way to go with the policy. So another key component, then I'll hand it to Greg, is in order to understand how do you design within circularity is really understand the context and constraints of the existing structure, but also to really understand what inventory you have for existing building, kind of documenting that the resources that you have on hand, they're kind of value, quote unquote, how you define value, and to really help building owners to take the first step of shifting their thinking. So, Greg, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, could we actually go back to the previous
Yeah,
page for 1 second?
sure.
So part of Lena's work focuses on, like Wei was saying, the uncovering the value of what owners currently have. And so this is from a project that she did in Malmo, Sweden. And the project is called Varvstaden, and it's a kind of a closed loop system. The owner has a series of buildings on a formerly industrial property that are being redeveloped. And so this is from a slide of just kind of the documentation that Lena put together, showing how the building serves as this toolbox, and viewing the different components as items to reuse, reclaim, or recycle, and that we need to present this information back to the client as or the owner as like our understanding of what the value is and how the different components can be repurposed. And this is a unique example because it is a large property with multiple buildings, and so the client is redeveloping them in stages, and so they're able to actually have materials taken out of one building, stored in another building until they're ready for future use. And this process that she pursued with this campus really showed what the importance of material audits and how to place value on materials, and also kind of coming out of this conversation and the conversation throughout the day of the symposium was the idea of reframing the word waste and instead speaking about things as materials. And so that kind of reinforces this concept that Lena, executed with this Varshan project. And also, if we go to the next slide, another example she showed from another architect in Copenhagen, where they renovated a very banal office building into I think it was kind of a multi-use building, but this image really compelled me, where you can see that they basically took the slab and cut it and like folded it down. So bringing like an architectural language to reuse here, and this became a bleacher for a kind of performance gathering space within this building, creating double height spaces and using the materials that were already there, and also reducing the carbon input to reuse them by literally cutting it on site and just dropping it down. So this is a bit complicated in terms of the engineering that went into making this particular work. We're making this particular change actually work because there's a lot of engineering that went into checking that these slabs could sit this way and the building could be supported. But it just goes to show that with a little creative thinking, we can kind of reconceptualize what reuse means. So this is the kind of latter part of her talk talked about Circu, which is a program that was in development when we first met Lena, and she's since developed a lot in terms of the actual infrastructure to operate it. And what it is is a database that pulls from open source information that's available in Denmark. So it's a bit different than our infrastructure here, but they have a lot of open source information on their building stock. And so it may not be, 100% accurate, but this gives an owner a very good picture of what value might exist in their building. And so the program really takes like a project site, and this is actually the site of that. I think this is the site of that building that we just looked at with the folded slab, and shows how the different what the different elements are, what is their material makeup. I don't know if we included it, but there are sections of drawing, like they have, integrated into this wall assemblies. But this gives an owner a picture of like, what is the carbon contained in the building? What is the cost and the value? And if I think we go to the next page, it starts to show how, oh, we didn't include it, but basically it's an interface that can be plugged into Revit and BIM programs. So as an architect, we can kind of mine this tool to inform our designs with actual data, rather than just speculation and conceptual ideas about how to reuse things. Session 2 was really about advancing reuse beyond recycling, and we had 2 speakers, Deconstruction Dave, as he's affectionately known. He's the founder of New York City Circularity Construction Network, but before that, he's also the owner of a reuse kind of general contracting practice that is in Seattle. And he's done over 5,000 reuse projects, mostly focused on residential work, but he really deconstructs the entire home and takes apart like stud by stud everything, and then, finds either a new use for them with a different client, or with the same client tries to reuse that material in a new project. And Stephanie Phillips is the senior program manager at the deconstruction department of the city of San Antonio, which is actually an arm of their historic preservation department. And so we brought these 2 together because they have done a lot of work together and have actually done a lot of talks together, but they both have this knowledge about like what it takes to actually implement a project, both from a constructability standpoint and from a financing, policy, and community support standpoint. And so one thing that Stephanie really highlighted was when I forgot to mention that San Antonio has the first deconstruction ordinance in the US. And so these are the key factors that went into putting that ordinance together. Sustainability, resilience, historic and cultural preservation, but Stephanie was very clear that this is not, like, reuse should not be seen as a alternative to preservation. It's they kind of go hand in hand, and there's all these kind of 6 factors, but workforce is definitely a large part of the kind of challenge, and also something that they really worked to build up in parallel with defining what this ordinance would be. So the city of San Antonio provides workforce training, and they also do a lot of work for affordable housing. So, as part of this talk, it really became clear that some of the big challenges are storage, because it's very location specific, and that for both Stephanie and Dave, there was a lot of early on, the work was repair focused, and it's not commercial, because the commercial challenges with labor and education are a lot heavier of a lift than with residential. And the workforce training for those different building types would also be quite different. We also talked about how to scale these up, and I think that is very specific to where you are. And so it's not really a blanket answer about how to scale up reuse. But these kind of 6 components are things to think about if this conversation is starting in a new place. I think there was one other slide here from Stephanie about the program that they run as the city. So they have the ordinance, they have the training that I mentioned, but they also have a material innovation center, and they partner with local communities. And the innovation center is really the place where they can store materials, offer materials to people. And it ties into the work that Dave is doing because he has been working to create multiple reuse innovation centers, which are also kind of not just storage facilities, but kind of a laboratory. And on the next slide, he talked a bit about the reuse innovation center he's starting in New York City, which has to do with it's kind of going hand in hand with the New York City Economic Development Corporation's design and deconstruction guidelines, which we'll touch on in a later session. But this is really kind of what the prototype for the New York City facility is looking like, with a series of workshops and kind of dedicated space for storage, but also space to really sell and distribute the products, not just put them in a place where they can sit forever. Oh, Wei, you're muted.
Sorry. So the way that we sequence these sessions is that we kind of zoom out international, aspirational, and then we kind of go into other examples from other state and cities. And then we want to kind of bring it back to New York State. So one of the bigger things that, a large piece of circularity is the policy aspects. So we were fortunate enough that we had members connection with folks in the city and state. So Selvi Binder, she's the senior policy advisor in the mayor's office, and Felix Hansel, I'm sure a lot of you know, he's the director of circular construction lab at Cornell. And we also had Brian Kavanagh, who's the state senator in New York City, and Anna Kelly is the assembly member from upstate New York. So this session really is kind of get some insight on the critical role of policy and how it can shape the future of circular construction from sort of the state legislation to local implementation, and how that will all sort of pan out. So there are no slides, just snapshots. So it was just a discussion, but a big thing that they opened with was New York City State is projected to run out of landfill space within the next 15 to 20 years. So infrastructure wise, this is just like something very real and tangible that we need to tackle. So Anna Kelly's, her background is actually in science. So she really emphasized the urgency of sort of how do we translating environmental data into actionable, accessible policy. So she's working on a bill with Senator Brian Kavanagh. They're kind of seeking to establish a template and parameter for waste reduction, and how do we recognize that waste management is responsible for 1/8 of total energy use statewide. And the piece that I thought was really helpful is that she really highlighted that policy doesn't really move forward without public support. So community engagement, issue awareness, and kind of just put consistent pressure on legislators are really essential. She said that bills don't get passed if they don't even make it onto the agenda. So if you ever wonder, oh, I'm not in the policy, how do I get involved? Just let your representative know your thoughts, and then email them, write them, and then let them know what's important for you. And so that's, I think, from our end, that's something that we can contribute to. And so kind of zooming in to a little bit on the local side, and in New York City, Selvi Binder, she discussed this is her in the middle, discussed the New York City approach, really kind of so far is heavily focus on operational carbon through programs like Local Law 97. But the city also recognizes that the need to address embodied carbon and material waste. So New York City role is, they're not mandates the way she described, but to how do we catalyze and set up incentive and guidance and pilots that to create these momentum for broader adoption. So there are no mandate policies in place yet, but all these things is meant to kind of push the industry towards that way. And lastly, just kind of highlight a couple of things Felix mentioned. You know, he is so well versed in the work, you know, in that research world, and he has published a lot of, you know, the white paper, the most recent white paper. He's also been kind of working closely with Brian, Anna, to kind of give them advice and sort of back up technical data on his research. So a couple of things that he argued that could advance the reuse really kind of requires three major shifts. One is obviously the policy intervention. What are some of the things can flip the value equation? Like if you give project early permanent access, can you reduce, you know, fees for reuse, and what are or mandatory deconstruction for buildings like pre a certain time period, similar to San Antonio? And then Greg mentioned earlier, like the language reform, like what we call waste is really not waste, it's material. The legal definition of waste carry implication, like actual implications that can make reuse harder because waste means something different legally. And reframing material as resources is so critical. And then the last piece is like data and measurement. You know, there are no current standards to really kind of quantifying reused material in a meaningful way. So we're all kind of in the blind, in the dark. And without this, like reuse can't really be properly valued. And it's hard to integrate into LCA or the policy framework. So that sort of sums up this session, but really enjoyed this session. So feel free to take a listen to the recording. Okay, session 4, Greg.
So session 4 was about infrastructure, and we really wanted to talk about that through the lens of glass recycling, which has been gaining momentum here in New York City. We had Sydney Mainster, who's the Vice President of Sustainability at the Durst Organization, a big developer here in New York, who has, you might know, the Cookbox Tower Bank of America building. And they have, or Sydney's been really spearheading this group that's focused on how to recycle glass, partnering with some manufacturers who will take back glass cullet, and also the glass, I don't remember the right word, but basically like a fabricator who strips the coatings and breaks down the material, which was previously something that was really a challenge for glass, especially for architectural glass. And then we had Amanda Kaminsky, who's a director. She's actually relocated back to her business that she once ran on her own, but she's a basically sustainability consultant. Nelson and Steve are both from the contracting side, and then Carlos was from KPF. So we had the interesting thing about this panel was it was heavily on the contractor side or installers. At the time, Amanda was with a contractor, so we had a lot more, like for an AIA talk, it was unusual that there were so many contractors and so few designers. So it really highlighted that we need to have a partnership between owner architect and GC or fabricator early on in the process and throughout the process to make circularity a real success. And Sydney really talked about, she kind of kicked off the conversation and talked about how, as an owner, what's important to her is that these materials that are installed in the buildings, which we specify and we interface with for a very short time period, at least for the particular project, she has to live with for however long it's installed, hopefully up to like 50 years, but not always the case. And so she has a very rigorous process that she asks her architects to evaluate the materials by, which really drives us to specify materials that have more responsible sourcing. And also gets people to think about the fact that these materials are living in the building for so long. If we go back to that slide you just showed, Wei, she did also talk about some data points which were kind of carried across multiple sessions, but Wei was touching on the waste and like the volume of waste, and we're running out of landfill space, but just that in New York alone, we were able to get these statistics from a white paper that Felix, one of the other presenters, helped put together, and that we have 7 and almost 8 million tons of construction and demolition waste from New York buildings in New York State alone. And it's just kind of more than 90% are building materials which could be reused. So we're really wasting a lot, and it's not just here in the city, it's across the state. Obviously there's things tied to this like creation of green jobs, but I think that that ties back to the workforce training that Stephanie touched on. So when we kind of dive deeper into this is actually a study that LMN Architects did, but you know, this session really highlighted that, especially in New York and probably similar to Boston, but the leases for interior spaces are short. It's 8 to 12 years. And so there's actually a more significant amount of interior demo that causes carbon, you know, waste and construction demolition waste when compared to both the structure and the envelope. I see 7 years in Boston. So similar. And when you think about, I think as architects, and we talk about carbon, we talk a lot about the superstructure being really important, because that is something that doesn't get changed as much. But when you look at this, it really shows that the interior work has a faster turnover and therefore a higher carbon consumption. And so when we think about glass as both an exterior material and an interior partition, then this begins to make more sense as a focus for glass reuse. The other thing about the materials, and it relates to this too, is that there's a time-based relationship with our materials. So when we talk about deconstruction as well, that starts to really tie all this together. One of the big issues for infrastructure in New York City is space. And so that means both storage space for materials that are being reused, but also storage space for the actual job site when we are trying to take materials out and deliver them somewhere else. So with the glass example, you know, many people, including ourselves, for Wei and I, we can both say this, would have thought, you know, we take the glass panels, especially when it's in a facade material, off as a system and then deconstruct it somewhere else. But in terms of practicality from the contractor side, it's really easier to just kind of smash them in place, whether that's inside the building or on the facade. And that ties in directly to how traditional demo practices would work. So this session really highlighted that, like, the partnership between the designer, the architect, and the owner can create a better result that's more integrated with how people currently work and rely on that rather than trying to create new and reinvent processes. So there's a synergy with conventional practice that we can mine. And this really shows, actually, this speaks to that kind of process. This was actually an example from the UK. And they did remove the glass panels, the glasses panels, and break them in a separate space or even inside the building, but they were removed by, removed in bags. And this particular example, which we don't have a slide of, but they were brought down the Thames River on a barge. And so it's just a little bit unique in thinking about, like, oh, where is the site located? It had riverfront access. That was the most convenient way to get it out. And so the logistics are just as important as the actual materials.
Yeah, and just go back to this. Greg and I also listen in on Sydney has a glass reuse group. There's monthly calls, and she will kind of talk to contractors and architects and on like actual project precedents, and some of the things like, oh, this building doesn't have a loading dock, or it's a certain size, and then these little bins can't, like the whole, it's all about logistics, and then how do we bake the design into for day one, so that in the future, if you need to kind of reuse, and then have, there's less of logistic issues. And then she also mentioned like some of the contractor talk about, the certificate of insurance, if it's reuse, has a different implication for demolition. So all these things are seemingly not designed, but it is part of design, because you kind of have to fold into the operations of the building when you're designing the building, so you allow these opportunities in the future uh, when the building inevitably needs to be renovated, adapted. So then the last session, we went into New York City project, and specifically a New York City Economic Development Corporation pilot project for the circular design construction guidelines. So the speakers are the team members and the VP from NYC EDC. So Sarah Sachs is a partner at Barrow Happel. They sort of lead the circularity portion, and Shafali Sanghi is director of sustainability from Dagner. She kind of oversees the sustainability component and work closely on the circularity and reuse portion. So this this session, we kind of want to use an actual example, but and how do you implement the design guidelines to a project fairly complex and large, very ambitious project, and it's in the very early phase of the design. It's still, in SD, or not even, like they just wrapped up concept design. So the first portion of the presentation is to really introduce NYCDC Circular Design Construction Guideline, and as part of city's decarb effort, NYCDC wants to implement this as a driver and as a guide to reduce embodied carbon, and then really envision new buildings or infrastructure, any major retrofit by 50% by the year. So these all are very ambitious goals. And then so like the circular design guideline really is created. So, oh, let me back up a little bit. New York City EDC, they are they're not a public agency, but they are sort of like the city's developer. They oversee approximately 9 billion portfolio for all buildings and construction that goes on public land. And so because they have a fairly large portfolio, and there's a lot they can leverage, so they target outcomes within NYCDC capital projects, and really kind of drive the demand for low carbon design construction, and then also use that knowledge and to build capacity across industry. So also build up the infrastructure that's required. So so this project, there are many high hopes. Is it's a pilot project. It's knowledge, building, really figure out what are the barriers within the city, and then how do you kind of also drive up demand, because there's a lot of sort of materials that are being kind of deconstructed, and then what is the current market. So this is a sort of slide, kind of a snapshot, show the outline of a typical project workflow that you can incorporate into the circular design construction and deconstruction tasks. And so in order to kind of complete the process, really they asked to coordinate with the asset owner and to determine, what is the intended purpose and need of the project, and and then they figure out, what is the um, uh, through different phases, at what time do you bring in, and what tasks needs to get done. So, there are a couple important documents, and a process is circularity audit is one of the big things where you kind of really help you to understand what you have on hand, kind of like a, more low-tech version of Circu, or like the Danish beta test software, but really to understand, like, what do you have on hand, and what's the quantity, and how do you weigh it, what's the value system, and what are the current infrastructure and marketplace that's available to kind of receive or exchange, or what's the economic value within the building itself. And then another thing is circular design construction plan. So this is a live document that keeps being updated at each phase. So you really kind of track progress, and you continuously update, what the circularity process, and then the data collection, and then how they're being used in each phase. And then there's also the material management and waste minimization tracker. Just like all of that is a lot of data tracking. And so you can kind of compare with the benchmark. So these obviously are super new territory, and, like, truthfully, no one has done it in that scale. So this is just a view of the building itself, and located in Midtown East. It's a uh, you know a it's an existing building that is also used for, sorry. It's a life and science. It's already a educational building, and so the idea is to there are different phases, but to deconstruct and to build a new building with CUNY and Hunter. So the idea is the pathway. So there's a college and then higher ed within the same campus, and then also involves site improvement, convert existing non-ADA accessible bridge to accessible, and then just improve the overall circulation and landscaping around the site. So this is a snapshot from the presentation. Is the team kind of went in the beginning of the project and did a Metaport scan of all representative spaces within the building, and then use that information between the scan and photographs to really kind of categorize different material streams, and what are some of the low-hanging fruit or long-term goals. And so I thought this was a very compelling image, just kind of use doors as example. Doors is complicated. You have different sizes, different functions, different rating. Some has louvers in them, some has asbestos, and something that you have high goals and you want to reuse as much as possible, and then it's almost like this kind of elimination game, like, oh, the size, and then asbestos and louvers, and suddenly you kind of have you don't have a lot left after these sort of parameter. And there are not a lot of companies, aside from Doors and Hinge company, to really kind of take these reused door and refurbish them into kind of new new doors or reused doors that has warranty. So many complications that, and doors is just one of the examples. So the step one is really kind of take that audit. And then another thing is to figure out, the team looked at different ways of, first, highest value, obviously you reuse without much modification, but if the materials can be used for the existing project, then is there a marketplace that you can retrieve value, you can sell it, or you could obviously the last resort is waste, landfill. So there's many different paths and for different materials. Oh, sorry. Um, and then so another thing is to track like what are some of the current marketplace. And so the team create an outreach list, and then they reach out various different manufacturers, reuse centers, and to understand what the appetite is currently, and then what's the future roadmap like, So I think Dave Bennett's reuse center, like some of it is maybe their new product that hasn't really been invented yet, that there is a huge economic opportunity that can come with so there's part of that too, is like kind of driving future economic opportunities. And then yeah, so that's really, and then the project is in such early phase. Everyone has such high hopes, and that people have so many questions, and there are so many questions for the team. And Shafali was like, look, you just gotta wait because it's so new, right? Like all these things take time and takes trials and errors, and testing out a new guideline that has never been done before in a project this scale is incredibly difficult. And not to mention there are different stakeholders within the building. So we are really excited to see how this project will evolve. I'm sure they will talk more about it in the coming years, but was really glad that they were able to join the symposium and give us some insights. So that's the recap for you guys.
Awesome. We are closing on the end, but for anyone who has questions, feel free to kind of use the raise hand function. I did have one or two with some context. So New York City clearly is really trying to take some steps to go forward. The NYC DEC is not only putting out language, but really kind of looking to incentivize a lot of this. What have you seen both through the symposium and just in the general area, kind of what would be the most effective way to really start pushing commercial deconstruction, reuse, and kind of completing the circle? For context, I think a lot of practitioners in our area, in New England and kind of Boston centric, really like the idea of it. They like the idea of eventually getting into circularity and, oh, kind of who else is doing this? But there's no real first, second steps being taken. And there could be some kind of policy items or kind of practical implementation. But really, in your area, what have you seen be the most effective way for kind of AEC practitioners to actually start implementing truly circular practices?
So honestly, that was Greg and I were like, what's the key ingredient like to kick the thing truly? And then to be honest, there is none. And it's like it's all sort of like all things kind of need to kind of happen, maybe not on the same pace, but there needs to be like the right, the circular design construction guideline is a good kind of jolt in the system. And then, there's momentum, there's also marketing. But then like I will have to say circularity, perhaps in smaller scale, but has been happening across the country. It's just not at the scale, the scale that we want. So I would use maybe Gensler as an example that, sometimes it's when you meet the right client, like the Etsy office that the climate action studio involved, the client was willing, and they have aligns with their mission, and then they were able to really kind of figure out how to reuse, and then got a lot of lessons learned, and that has without policy incentives, right? But they're also Greg and I have been in many roundtables, kind of this, like how do we do this? But really, it is kind of these painful little steps. But sometimes when you hit like the right threshold and then something happens, and I would say you do need sort of incentives from the policy side, but on the market side, there are a lot of lessons learned from the industry. And then it's sometimes you just kind of strike the perfect balance. I don't know if there's, I think the city and the state implementing some of the barriers, like remove some of the barriers that, for example, the wood reuse, you know, something that's so obvious that, how do we remove that section in the law so then people can not have to jump through the hoops in order to kind of reuse like something obviously can be reused. So I'm rambling a little bit, but like I don't know what the magic thing is, but I really truly feel like after all these conversations, it's everything.
Sure. Any kind of quickly before we reach out to anyone else, any kind of not silver bullet policies, but policies we've talked about kind of incentives before, but any you had mentioned kind of renaming waste as kind of materials, and that was kind of new for me. The idea of you're always seeing this as waste kind of leaving off site and almost codifying that into law of no, these are materials, and because waste has its own designation, obviously municipal waste and things like that. Are there any other kind of unique policies either on the municipal or state level that say New York City or New York is looking to push that have been at least helpful in growing even the idea a bit?
I definitely, those are things like what Anna Kelly and Brian Kavanaugh are working on, the whole sort of procedural template for, kind of related to your previous question too, is how do we quantify the, the sort of the basically material like values that we're throwing away and that kind of help people to understand. And I think language is definitely one of them. And I think even for practitioners like us, like we still talk about waste, but really it's just kind of that shifting that mindset to not refer them as waste. But Greg, I don't know if there's anything else that
I think
jumped
it's,
out to you.
yeah, I would say less about any particular policy and more about connecting with the people who are writing the policies and advocating for them to as a group. So getting a number of people together to show support, or at least to write a letter and have a bunch of people sign it, is one of the things that the policymakers who we had speak highlighted as a way to help push their initiatives, because the way they'll be running multiple policies at the same time and things get dropped because they don't have enough support in that session. Yeah.
Sure. Looking at support and if practitioners want to do this, kind of how do you show it, and instead of just kind of keeping within the industry bubble, but actually kind of pushing it forward to policymakers themselves. Very interesting.
Right. And I think also keeping it local, because individual areas may have taken steps beyond what's already been established. So for instance, in New York, there were two towns that were highlighted, Auburn, and I don't remember the second one, but who already had more robust local requirements than the state had. And so it didn't make sense to apply a top-down state policy to those places. So, just being sensitive to the fact that a blanket policy doesn't necessarily work in everyone's best interest all the time.
Sure, sure. And the last minute or two, if anyone else has any questions, please, the floor is open. If not, I want to thank, I know that Wei had to leave, but Greg, thank you as well for kind of coming and speaking to this. Really great to see what kind of other nearby regions are doing. So we appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And in the last minute, I don't know if Mike Elliott is still here, but if he is, the one thing I wanted to mention is the upcoming C&D subcommittee meeting. If you want to quickly talk to that.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, so next week we'll have our September C&D subcommittee meeting. We're going to be focusing on the C&D action plan mid-course review. So each program within the solid waste management program has an action plan, and we're the master plan is 10 years duration. We're 5 years into it, and in each program we'll be reassessing are, doing a mid-course corrections and reassessing where we are and any changes we want to make as we proceed along.
Sure. Yeah, and I posted the link in chat just now. But some hopefully good work coming out of that subcommittee to really push things forward and get us to a better place with the solid waste master plan. So with that, that is time. So thank everyone who's still left. We appreciate it. We'll be kind of ending this recording and sending it out. Olivia, anything before we close?
No, that was a great presentation. I know our percentages are gone, but it's exciting to hear how New York is having all these parallel things feed into each other, academic feeding the policy, which then feeds into the pilot projects, which are then testing out the industry and manufacturers. So
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, we'll not only send out a quick recap, but also the YouTube link when we upload it, along with any contact information for both Wei and Greg. So thank you, everyone. We appreciate it. And until next time, thank you.
Thank you.